Hi there, Mayor, Mayor Pro Tem, council members, and members of the public. My name is Tatiana Arno. I am your city engineer. And this is a presentation for the pavement management update for the city of Oxnard. So the recommendation is that the Public Works and Transportation Committee recommend that the City Council receive a report on the pavement management program and to provide input and direct staff to either one, fund ongoing street pavement conditions at an average pavement condition index level of 65. This can be achieved within the current budget and no additional funding is required. Or second, to identify funding to support improving the pavement conditions to an average PCI level of 70. It is anticipated that this will cost an additional $43.7 million over the next 3 years, or approximately $14.6 million annually. Or number three, funding to support improving pavement conditions to an average PCI level of 75. It is anticipated that this will cost an additional $116.1 million over the next 5 years, or an extra $23.2 million annually. So what is the pavement management program? So basically, it's a system that we use to track our inventory, store any of the work history. So anything that we've recently reconstructed, resurfaced, repaved, gets thrown into this. Basically, it's an online system to help track all of these things. It also assists us with the cost estimating and identifying the candidate streets for potential repair and maintenance for the future. The street inspections that are a part of this pavement management program are done on a 3-year rotation, and we have consultants on board to do this for us. Their name is Pavement Engineering Incorporated. They're a very well-known company in the area, and we've been working with them for a number of years. And they basically take a third of the residential and collector streets and inspect those each year. And in addition to that, we actually do full inspection of every single one of our arterial roads on an every year basis. So arterials every year, residential and collector just once every 3 years. Here's an image showing what the dashboard looks like, and this kind of just gives you a quick glance of a lot of the statistics that come out of this program. So such as, what is our current PCI, the PCI by class of road, so whether it's arterial, collector, residential, what we have in the remaining service life for the roads, generally speaking, and kind of tells you how much we've increased our PCI since the last report was put together. So the consultants actually measure quite a few things to determine what the pavement condition is, and that includes the cracks per mile, how deep and long those cracks may be, what the crack pattern is, and what percentage of the road segment displays those deficiencies. And then we take this information here in Public Works and we consider how the timing of the street repairs match with pipe replacements for, like, for instance, cast iron pipe or asbestos pipe that needs to get replaced. And then we obviously try to group these as much as possible to maximize the cost effectiveness and the efficiency of the job. So the larger the job, the more savings there are associated with that job. And basically, we take all of this analysis and create our pavement management program, or what we call our PMP, and then we have our recommended projects coming out of that. We have a PCI chart here that kind of explains basically the different levels of the pavement condition index and what we consider each of them. So 80 to 100 PCI is very good or excellent. 70 to 79 is good, and that's where we actually strive to be. We would always ideally have an average PCI of anywhere between 70 and 79, really 70 and 75. So then, and so on and so forth, you have fair from 60 to 69, and down the table there. So here's a quick glance at what our street system looks like. So we have 299 lane miles of arterial roads, which is just under 30% of our overall system. And what you'll notice here is that our average PCI is actually at that 73 for our arterial. So that's actually a very healthy PCI for us here in the city of Oxnard. Our collector roads make up about 110 lane miles, or 12% of our system. That's down at 64. 64 is an okay PCI to have, but again, we would strive to make that a little bit higher, at least get that up to 70 ideally. Same with our residential. That makes up the largest percentage of our system with just under 196 lane miles or 51.7%. And that, same as the collectors, has an average PCI of 64 right now, or at least as of January of this year. And finally, our alleyways, they make up about 131 lane miles of our system, and that is down at an average PCI of 24. So once you take everything into consideration, our average PCI for the system as a whole is at about 64. Here are some projects that we have coming down the pipeline right now. So Rice Avenue is actually just about to wrap up. We anticipate that to be done by the end of this month. That had an average PCI of 19. I do want to remind everybody, we've mentioned this in previous meetings, but it is only a stopgap measure. So we will be coming back in about 7 or 8 years and doing a more substantial resurfacing along Rice Avenue. That'll come after the Rice and 5th grade separation project is completed. Then we have Bryce Canyon South and Fremont North neighborhoods that are currently under construction, and those we anticipate being completed by September of this year. Then we have various alley reconstructions that are coming that should start sometime this summer, and they are generally down the Oxnard Boulevard corridor. Those we anticipate to be completed by January of 2022. La Colonia neighborhood, we are currently replacing the cast iron pipe there. And so once we complete that project, we will turn around and go ahead and do all of the much needed resurfacing there. And we anticipate that job being completed around March of 2022. And then going down the line here, we have a residential neighborhood street resurfacing project. So these are actually essentially, we took streets throughout the entire city in various neighborhoods, and those that have an average PCI of 25 or less were included in this project. So again, it goes back to economies of scale, right? We try to get as many roads in one project as we can, and that's what we did with this one that we anticipate to be done about a year from now, and that would be beginning late this summer or in the fall. And then we are getting into the design for the rest of these here on this list, 7 through 10. So East Gonzales Road, Rice Avenue Commercial Neighborhood, West Gonzales Road, and Teal Club Road are getting into the design phase right now, and we hope to have these done by late spring and early summer of next year. All right, so here's an overview of Measure O. So Measure O was a voter-approved half-cent general sales tax, which was created to protect and maintain vital city services, including the rehab of streets. This brings in approximately $16 million on average every year, of which $1.7 million has been dedicated annually for debt service for the street resurfacing bond, which was set to expire in June of 2029. And not to mention that Measure O is set to also sunset in March of 2029. So as we all know, Measure N is actually tied to our Measure O. So Measure N was passed by the voters this past November, and it implements specific requirements on Measure O revenue tied to the overall conditions of streets and alleys. So that pavement condition index is what we're talking about here. So basically, what Measure N says is that we have to reach a PCI of at least 65 by September 30th, 2022. Otherwise, if it's not met, Measure O would be set to expire on March 31st of 2023. And if we are able to achieve that, then we have to reach a PCI of at least 70 by September 30th of 2024. And if we don't meet that, we would have our Measure O expire on March 31st of 2025. So let's say that we actually reach 70 by September 30th of 2024, then Measure N says that we must reach a PCI of at least 75 by September 30th of 2026. So 2 years later, right? If this isn't met, then Measure O would set to expire on March 31st of 2027. And finally, if we were successful at reaching PCI of 75 by 2026, we would then strive for a PCI of at least 80 by September 30th of 2028. If that isn't met, then Measure O would expire March 31st, 2029, which is when it was originally going to sunset either way. However, City Council could extend Measure O's termination for an additional 5-year period if the average PCI for streets and alleys is at least 80. So if we do reach that PCI of 80, we could theoretically keep extending our Measure O for 5-year periods through City Council approval. However, we'll get into the numbers of what it takes to actually get to that PCI of 80 here in a second. So currently, the estimated funding we have for this current fiscal year, we have about $13.7 million. That's all going towards projects that are either already in construction or about to be in construction. Next fiscal year, we have about $1 million from Measure O going into it through the 2014 lease revenue bond that I mentioned earlier, and another $6.8 million through the gas tax or RMRA. And then in the subsequent fiscal years, we anticipate that RMRA will be about $4 million per year, and we don't have any other guaranteed source of funding at this time. So this in a snapshot tells you what we have in guaranteed funding. And so obviously $4 million a year is not very much to not only maintain PCI, but to mention trying to increase our PCI. All right, so what kind of investment do we need to make? And that all depends on where council wants us to take this. So again, kind of reiterating Measure N, right? So to reach 65 by September 30th of 2022, if Measure O would expire by March 31st of 2025, if we don't meet this, the total estimated needed to obtain that PCI of 65 is $18.6 million. We have about $21.5 million available between now and September 30th of 2022. So there is no funding gap here. What this is telling us is that we'll actually be able to reach that PCI of 65 by September 30th of 2022. And let me just remind you, our PCI currently is at 64. So this isn't very difficult to obtain. Now, to reach a PCI of 70 by September 30th of 2024, we need a total estimated of $73.2 million. And right now, between now and September 30th of 2024, we anticipate we have $29.5 million available to us, which means that we have a gap to make up of $43.7 million. Now, remember, this isn't annually, this is between now and September 30th of 2024. So similar to that, PCI of 75 by 2026, we need about $153.6 million between now and 2026. We currently have an anticipated $37.5 million between now and 2026 available to us. So the gap that we would need to be making up is $116.1 million. And finally, to reach a PCI of 80, we need a whopping $236.1 million between now and 2028. Right now, we anticipate having $45.5 million available to us between now and 2028, meaning that there is a almost $200 million funding gap to reach a PCI of 80 by 2028. So that's a substantial amount. That's very aggressive, but that is essentially what it would take to meet the provisions of Measure N. So now, what is our investment versus return here, right? What are we looking at? So I already previously mentioned that to reach a PCI of 65 between now and 2022 or late summer of next year, we actually will be meeting it. That won't be an issue. And the net benefit for Measure O is, remember that $16 million that I mentioned we receive annually? So that means that we actually get to keep that $16 million in the city's pocket. And so that's the return there. To reach the PCI of 70 by 2024, we had a gap of just under $44 million. This means that we'd actually have to invest probably from Measure O. It could be from general fund or Measure O, but assuming it's from Measure O, $43.7 million would be coming out of that between now and 2024. And nothing would need to come out of the general fund. The Measure O fund could cover this cost between now and 2024. And the net benefit from Measure O for that would be $4.3 million. But let me say this, if we invest this money from Measure O into streets, that means that we are taking that away from other services that Measure O was funding previously. And the majority of that funding would be coming to streets and streets only. So I just want to make that a clear distinction. And so what we'd have remaining from Measure O in this instance is $4.3 million that can then be used for other city services, but the remaining funds, again, would have gone straight to street resurfacing. To reach a PCI of 75 by 2026, we had a $116 million gap. We'd be investing $80 million from Measure O, so that's the entirety of Measure O between now and 2026. And in addition to that, we would then have to take another $36 million from the general fund between now and 2026, so about just over 5 years, in order to be able to meet that PCI of 75. And similarly to for PCI of 80, we have a $190 million gap there. 112 would be coming from Measure O. That means, again, the entirety of Measure O between now and 2028 would be going to streets and streets only. And that means that we would still need another $79 million to be invested from the general fund in order to be able to reach that PCI of 80. But again, essentially no more Measure O for any other services, and almost $80 million coming out of the general fund over the next 7 years. In addition to the investments we need to make from a street resurfacing standpoint, there are operational resources that are needed to accomplish these goals, right? So to reach a PCI of 65 by next year, this can be accomplished as we stand today with the current staffing and as we are moving along today. No issue there. To reach a PCI of 70 by 2024, we would need at least one additional project manager to assist us in the execution of these projects. And in addition to that, we need to secure an on-call street resurfacing contract to help us expedite the construction of these projects. And so those are two things that we would be requesting for council approval in order to be able to reach these target goals. And similar for PCI of 75, we'd need 3 employees, 2 project managers, and 1 assistant civil engineer. And again, securing that on-call contract is key to all of these goals from 70 to 80. And then finally, for the 80 PCI, I need another 3 project managers, an assistant civil, and a junior civil to assist with the project management and the plan production for the street resurfacing plans. And so again, securing the on-call is a key component to that as well. So what are the next steps? Well, first and foremost, we need to identify the available funding to meet that gap. And related to that, we need to identify the appropriate PCI that's associated with that funding level. So that's what we're here seeking today is guidance on what level that is that council would like us to achieve so that we can identify that funding that's needed and also the operational resources that are needed. We'd also need to expedite that new on-call street resurfacing construction contract. Staff is currently working on that right now. And so you should anticipate seeing that coming before council in June or July of this year. We would need to increase staffing as identified to match the desired PCI in the table that I just showed. And in addition to that, we do need to update our standard plans, which we plan on bringing to the council in the fall. And the reason for this is we want to make sure that when we're going in there and doing our repairs, that they are being done to the latest standards and regulations. And we also need to ensure that our developers are following those exact same standards. Some of our standard plans are almost 20 years old at this point, so they really need to be revisited, refreshed, and essentially we'd like for council to acknowledge these standard plans as well, and we'd get them codified into our code of ordinances. And most importantly, we'd be officially establishing a moratorium to protect our investments. That way, you know, when another utility on the private side may want to come in and put something down in our road, ideally this would incentivize them to not do that when we have just resurfaced our roads, right? So that'll encourage a lot of more coordination between the city and the private developers, private utilities, things of that nature, and it'll hopefully maintain our streets that we resurfaced recently in nice condition, and so we don't have cuts all over the place. As far as the financial impact goes, there is no direct financial impact to receive this report and provide the input. Depending on the input and final recommendations to be approved by council, the following impacts may occur. So first, if council decides to maintain a street pavement condition at an average PCI level of 65, let me remind you, there is no financial impact associated with that item. Or second, if council decides to support improving pavement conditions to an average PCI level of 70, it is anticipated that this will cost an additional $43.7 million over the next 3 years, or $14.6 million annually. This amount can be covered entirely by the Measure O funds with just a little bit left over for other services. Or third, if council decides to support improving pavement conditions to an average PCI level of 75, it is anticipated that this will cost an additional $116.1 million over the next 5 years, or $23.2 million annually. Approximately $80 million of that can be covered by the Measure O funds, which again means it doesn't cover any other services. And then the remaining $36.1 million would be covered by the general fund. That does conclude this presentation. I do thank you for your time, and I'm happy to take any questions.